attention, I will turn this camera so he can see who he's
Perfect.
talking to. There you go.
All right. Hey guys. How can I? Okay, there we go. So I'm going to start a little bit with a background on phytochemicals, and then I'm going to start the lecture talking about the implications of phytochemicals for vascular disease, specifically peripheral artery disease, which is the disease that we study in our lab. And then I'll talk more on the second part of the lecture about potential implications for fitness and exercise and sport. But just to give a little bit of a historical background, modern nutritional science is considered to have started only in the 20th century with the discovery of vitamins. So before that, nutrition wasn't necessarily a science, but actually nutrition is something that's been studied for centuries. So for example, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Egyptians, a lot of the very early civilizations, when you go back and look at some of their text and their art, you see that they actually understood that nutrition could be used as medicine, and they understood that certain foods had certain health effects. So a lot of people are familiar with a Greek philosopher quote that says, let food be thy medicine. People still repeat that often now. What's interesting is that specifically phytochemicals. So phytochemicals are basically plant-derived chemicals. So phyto just means plant. So chemicals that are derived in plants, they've been used traditionally in medicine for thousands of years. Eastern medicine, again, like I said, the ancient Greece. In fact, in the year 50 AD, a Greek physician actually wrote a book called De Materia Medica, which basically just outlined many different phytochemicals and potential health uses for them. Now, in the later half of the 20th century, after the discovery of vitamins and minerals, there was a focus in nutrition science to kind of see how nutrition may affect different health outcomes. And one of the ways that we started to learn more about how nutrition affects health is through these large epidemiologic studies that were conducted. So these epidemiologic studies basically look at people, look at a population of people in one time point, and then they can see, okay, let's see how much of a certain nutrient or a certain foods that these individuals eat, and see how they're associated or correlated to the outcome, the incidence of different diseases like diabetes or cardiovascular disease or cancer. And several studies have shown that there's an inverse relationship, a negative relationship between fruit and vegetable consumption and risk of chronic disease, and also all-cause mortality. So basically what that means is that people who eat more fruits and vegetables tend to have a much lower rates of dying and much lower rates of cardiovascular disease and other diseases. So basically, as the servings per day of fruits and vegetable consumption increases across studies, what you see is a decrease in all-cause mortality here. And so the disease that we study in our lab and the disease that I'm going to share the implications of phytochemicals for is a disease called peripheral artery disease. Now, obviously, the reason I chose to talk about this is because it's the disease that we research in the lab, but also because there's a lot of characteristics and aspects of this disease that actually extend to many other conditions. So the pathophysiology of this disease, PAD, is very similar to cardiovascular disease, is very similar to cancer. And so from the studies that I'll show you in which they tested certain phytochemicals for this disease, you can almost take those results and translate them to other diseases and see that these phytochemicals may also have beneficial effects in other conditions because they share a common central pathophysiology. But just to give a brief background of PAD, Many of you might be familiar with coronary artery disease, where plaque builds up in the arteries of the heart, the coronary arteries. Now, less commonly known is that that same atherosclerotic plaque can also build up in the arteries of the lower extremities, so in the legs. So you can have this narrowing of the arteries in the lower leg, and you can see that here on the angiogram. You have reduced blood flow because of that plaque buildup. And what that does is, again, it causes a reduction in blood flow to the legs. Now, when you have a reduced amount of blood flow to the legs, the problem is that causes a severe impairment in walking. So patients are unable to walk very long distances before they feel a lot of pain, just because they're not getting that sufficient blood flow and sufficient oxygen to their legs. And so, as you can see, like, maximum walking distance for PAD patients is very, very low, and it's much lower than so this is a non-PAD controls. This is during a 6-minute walking test, which is a common clinical test. You just have patients walk for 6 minutes, like up and down a hallway, and measure the distance that they can walk. And as you can see, PAD patients, walk, as little as half as much as a non-PAD control patient. And so you can see that, less than a minute, they start feeling pain in their legs, and they have to rest. The first couple studies that I'm going to talk about that looked at how nutrition may affect the incidence of PAD are cross-sectional studies, like I just mentioned a little bit earlier. So cross-sectional studies are a type of research where you look at population at one time, and then you see, okay, how many of these patients have the disease and how many do not have the disease? And then of those that have the disease, how many are, for example, eating fruits and vegetables, or a certain amount of fruits and vegetables, or how many are, for example, smoking, or how many are drinking, things like that. So the exposure and the outcome are measured at the same time, and it just gives you kind of like a snapshot view of the population at one time point to see what is which factors may be associated with certain conditions or diseases. And so one of the largest cross-sectional studies included over 4 million people. And what they found was that out of those 4 million people, only about a third of them ate, or at least reported eating, 3 or more servings of fruits and vegetables in a day. And the more fruits and vegetables the patients, the participants ate, the less risk of having PAD. So, for example, those who ate 3 or more servings of fruits and vegetables a day actually had an 18% lower they have 18% lower chance of being a PAD patient than patients who ate fruits and vegetables only less than monthly. So maybe like once a month, or even less than that. So the more frequently that the fruits and vegetables were being consumed, the less chance that a patient would have this disease, peripheral artery disease. Now, another study looked at patients that were following a Mediterranean diet versus patients who were following normal diets. So the Mediterranean diet is a very common diet used in research studies. It's considered one of the evidence-based diets that is recommended by nutritional organizations like the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. But the Mediterranean diet is primarily a plant-based diet, emphasizing eating lots of fruits and vegetables. So it's that's thought to be one of the reasons that the Mediterranean diet is associated with health benefits, is due to the high amount of fruits and vegetables in the diet. And what that study showed was that higher adherence to the Mediterranean diet was associated with a 56% reduced risk of PAD. So again, these studies are showing that the patients who eat more fruits and vegetables who follow this Mediterranean diet, which includes more fruits and vegetables, have a lower chance of having PAD than patients who eat less fruits and vegetables. So again, these several cross-sectional studies, these population studies have been done, and they, again, continuously all the time show that fruits and vegetables intake is associated with better outcomes. So more recently, we've started to understand the potential reasons for these fruit and vegetable associated health benefits. And, you know, I think you could tell anybody, you know, for even when you're in elementary school, you know, what's a healthy diet? And they'll probably tell you like, oh, you know, eat more fruits and vegetables. It's something that we're taught from when we're little kids, you know, maybe when our parents tell us, you know, eat your vegetables, you know, eat your broccoli or whatever. But, you know, only recently have we really began to understand the specific like biological mechanisms of what is in these fruits and vegetables that produce these health effects. So there's been thousands of identified phytochemicals. Against phytochemicals are just chemicals that are isolated from plant foods, and they're divided into classes based on their chemical structures. And so the chemical structure of the phytochemicals will actually dictate their function. So based on their structure, they'll bind to different receptors or activate different signaling pathways or donate specific functional groups that can activate pathways, but all of it is based on their structure. So as you can see here, this is a list of an example of many of the phytochemicals that are widely studied. And we'll talk about some of these. But don't worry, I don't think you'll ever have to you know, memorize drawing out the structure of these. You know, maybe if you've taken organic chemistry or you have to take organic chemistry, that, you know, that might give you some PTSD just looking at these structures. But basically, the main way that these phytochemicals are thought to act is by producing an antioxidant effect. So what is an antioxidant? So first, to understand what is an antioxidant, we have to understand oxidants. So in our body, we have what's called free radicals. So free radicals are very highly reactive molecules. So they're molecules that are typically formed from oxygen. And then when they are formed from oxygen, they're called reactive oxygen species. That's the most commonly studied free radical, although there are also like reactive nitrogen and reactive sulfur species. But for the most part, when we talk about oxidative stress, we're talking about reactive species formed from oxygen. So when oxygen gains electrons and becomes unstable, it becomes very highly reactive. Now, the problem is these reactive oxygen species can actually damage lipids, proteins, DNA, which can cause a lot of cellular damage and cellular death. And this reactive oxygen species, they can come from many different places. Normally we produce just through normal metabolism by eating food and metabolizing that food aerobically in the electron transport chain. We're going to produce some amount of reactive oxygen species, which is okay. You know, a little bit is okay. But the problem is when we're exposed to some of these other you know, environmental you know, stimuli that increase the ROS production to where it then overwhelms our antioxidant system. That's where we have something called oxidative stress, where it's just too much reactive oxygen species that we're not able to take care of. And things like smoking, processed food, inactivity, these are all inducers that increase the amount of ROS that we have in our body. Now, luckily, we have antioxidants. And antioxidants can neutralize these free radicals, and so basically block these ROS, or basically make them into less reactive compounds, so that they don't cause the damage that oxidative stress can cause. So if you look here, you can see oxygen, when it gains an electron, it becomes something called superoxide. So it has this extra electron, and this makes it very reactive, and so it can bind to proteins, lipids, DNA, and cause damage. But luckily we have antioxidants that can basically take care of this superoxide in one of two ways. So there's two main classes of antioxidants. There's the enzymatic antioxidants, which is like the first line of defense, and then there's the scavenger antioxidants, which typically when we think of antioxidants, we're typically thinking of the scavengers. Like, everybody knows antioxidants, vitamin C, vitamin E, right? Especially now with, COVID, and there's been a lot of, focus on, make sure you're getting enough antioxidants and stuff like that. So even when you were probably a little kid, you remember like, oh, drink orange juice because of the vitamin C, because it's an antioxidant. So these are the scavenger antioxidants. Basically, the scavenger antioxidants can actually donate their electrons to the free radical. So now that the free radical no longer has this unpaired electron, because it'll have this electron donated from here, from the antioxidant, and so it'll become less reactive. But we also have enzymes in our body, like superoxide dismutase, glutathione peroxidase, catalase. These are enzymes that actually catalyze the conversion of these very reactive species into less reactive species. So SOD, for example, will convert superoxide to hydrogen peroxide, which is a lot less reactive than superoxide. And then other enzymes will actually then further convert hydrogen peroxide to just water. And so it's, very unreactive. And that way we've taken care of the reactive oxygen species. So theoretically, now, so we've established now that oxidative stress happens when the oxidants ROS exceed our antioxidants. So it would make sense that, well, if you want to get rid of oxidative stress, just increase the amount of antioxidants. The problem with that is that there's been many studies that have tested this with the scavenger antioxidants like vitamins, vitamin C, vitamin E. And here's a list of many of these is very, very large studies, a lot of funding and investment went into these studies to see if can we really protect ourselves from oxidative stress by consuming or supplementing with these vitamins. But the problem is that most of these studies have shown no benefit to the use of antioxidants like vitamin C and vitamin E. One of the big studies was, for example, these HOPE studies. So these HOPE studies were basically assessing if vitamin E can be used, to prevent cardiovascular disease, or at least lower the risk of cardiovascular disease. But again, they most of these studies had a negative outcome, and so now it's kind of understood a potential reason why this may be. First of all, you can take all the vitamin C and all the vitamin D, vitamin D or vitamin E that you want, but how do you know that those vitamins are actually going to reach the target tissue? Like, for example, the vascular system. How do you know they're actually going to get into the vascular tissue to induce their antioxidant effect? And then there's other issues too. So if you're in a situation where you have high oxidation, high ROS, those antioxidants like vitamin C and vitamin D can actually become oxidized themselves and lose their function, or even potentially become oxidants themselves and be more damaging. So now we've started to move away from using these non-specific scavenger vitamins, and now there's been a focus on, can we combat oxidative stress by actually improving our own endogenous antioxidant defense system? And so can we increase the levels of these first line defense enzymes, can we have our bodies produce more glutathione peroxidase, produce more superoxide dismutase on its own? So what's interesting is one of the ways that we can actually induce expression of these antioxidant genes is by phytochemicals. So phytochemicals have been shown to, instead of acting like scavengers, the way that phytochemicals act as antioxidants is they actually um, activate signaling pathways that increase the gene expression and protein expression of the antioxidant enzymes in our own body. So we're basically allowing our body to fight off the oxidative stress on its own rather than, using a scavenger. So the main protein that is targeted by these phytochemicals is a protein called NRF2 or NRF2. So this protein has been called the master regulator of the antioxidant response. It's a transcription factor. When this transcription factor is activated, it can be activated by several different phytochemicals, which we'll talk about. It will cause the NRF2 to actually go into the nucleus and start the transcription of these antioxidant proteins like SOD and glutathione peroxidase. And then now that you have these enzymes that are upregulated, it's a much more effective way at blunting or reducing oxidative stress and reactive oxygen species. So I'm going to go through and talk about some of the phytochemicals. The first group of phytochemicals I'm going to talk about are the flavonoids, and the flavonoids are divided into subgroups themselves: the flavanols, the isoflavonoids, etc. So one that we're really going to focus on is the flavanols. So the flavanols, first of all, in animal studies, they've been very successful at actually reducing aortic atherosclerosis. So if you feed or supplement a mouse's diet with these flavanols, you see that they have much lower amount of aortic atherosclerosis. And this was kind of the initial studies. Typically in research, we start with cell culture or animal studies, and then if we see promising results, we can move to human studies and see if it translates into the humans as well. And what's interesting is that in humans, flavonoids are also negatively associated with coronary heart disease in many studies. So even in PAD specifically, it's been shown that patients who eat more of these flavonoids have a lower risk of hospitalization, surgery, amputations. They have much better outcomes. And specifically, one of the classes, subgroups of flavanols that have been studied include catechin and epicatechin and EGCG. So these are probably the two most widely studied flavonoids. So catechin and epicatechin, these are compounds that are mostly found in cocoa. So cocoa has the highest concentration of these compounds than any other food. And then EGCG is found in very high concentrations in green tea. So, if you like chocolate, you might get excited. Oh, this means I can eat chocolate. Chocolate's healthy. Now, unfortunately, the amount of catechin and epicatechin are mostly going to be found in the very high cocoa content chocolate. So, dark chocolate, maybe if you ever see any dark chocolate, more than 80 or more than 90% cocoa, those are the ones that are really going to give you those the concentrations of catechin, epicatechin, which maybe you may not enjoy as much, unfortunately, as the milk chocolate. What's interesting is in studies where they actually want to assess the effect of these phytochemicals, oftentimes the control group will just be normal milk chocolate, and then the experimental group will be the dark chocolate, and typically you see more than at least 85% cocoa being used. So in contrast to the earlier studies that I talked about, the cross-sectional studies where you just look at a population at one time, there's another type of study where it's an actual intervention study, like a randomized control trial or a randomized control crossover trial. So in the randomized control crossover trial here, what they do is you recruit participants and you give them one arm of the study. You give them, for example, in this case, they get dark chocolate, and then you measure some outcome, and then you have a washout period, maybe a couple weeks. You have them come back, and then you give them the opposite supplement or intervention. And so this was one of the first studies in PAD to look at potential effect of phytochemicals for improving outcomes. And what they saw was that dark chocolate significantly improved the walking distance of the patients. So this is 6-minute walk distance. So remember, I talked about the 6-minute walk test, which is a common clinical test. The patients walked significantly longer, 11.5 meters longer, 11% longer when they ate the dark chocolate compared to when they ate the milk chocolate. And their maximum walking time also increased by 20 seconds. Again, like I said, these patients can only walk for so long before they experience severe pain in their legs. So it's, it seems like it might be very clinical relevant that the fact that they can walk for almost half a minute longer without experiencing pain. Now, because of that study was very promising, it was actually followed up by this randomized control trial. In this study, they actually gave patients were randomized to either cocoa, 15 grams of cocoa a day, which had 75 milligrams of epicatechin, or a placebo. The placebo, again, was just like a milk chocolate. There's no epicatechin in there. It was, and they had to drink the supplement for 6 months. And then after 6 months, they came back and they saw how the supplement may have affected their different measures, including their walking performance. And what's interesting is that the 6-minute walk distance improved by 42.6 meters. So almost 50. So the patients that got the dark chocolate, the cocoa, actually walked 42.6 meters more than the patients that got the placebo, which is a very significant and actually very clinically relevant increase in walking performance. So that was the flavonoids, and now we're going to switch and talk a little bit about some other phytochemicals. So the next group of phytochemicals that we're going to go over are the nitrogen-containing compounds. So this is a favorite for a lot of athletes, and I know some of y'all might be athletes, so you might have heard about this. You might actually have taken some of this yourself. But so the nitrogen containing compounds are basically a dietary source of inorganic nitrate. So nitrate, for example, you can get it from beetroot. Again, this is where I said, athletes, I think beetroot and beetroot juice are pretty commonly used in endurance athletes now. But so beetroot can actually be an inorganic nitrate donor. That nitrate can be converted into nitrite, and then the nitrite can be converted into nitric oxide. And nitric oxide, we know, has very important roles for like vasodilation and opening up blood vessels. And so that's the reason that beetroot specifically has been studied as one of the more widely studied nitrogen containing compounds. So beetroot, or the name of the root is actually Beta vulgaris. It contains, it's known to have antioxidant activity and also increased nitric oxide levels. And it's actually recommended as a adjunct treatment in patients with cardiovascular disease. So it's actually recommended by American Heart Association, other cardiovascular organizations as an adjunct treatment. It's also been studied in peripheral artery disease. So again, in this study, they randomized the patients to either drink 500 milliliters of beetroot juice or a placebo. And again, the walking performance was significantly increased when the patients drank the beetroot juice compared to the placebo. So this is the claudication onset time, which basically just means however long it took for them to start feeling pain in their legs. So again, it was 32 seconds longer before they started feeling pain in their legs, and their also their peak walking time, or the maximum amount of time that they were able to walk, also increased by almost a minute, so 17%, which is, you know, very, for these patients, it's you know, very clinically you know, significant. And then this study was actually followed up with another randomized control trial. Again, this study was a 12-week study. So the you know, typically what you see is you start with like an acute study. If the acute study seems beneficial, you can follow it up with a large clinical trial where you actually randomize patients to 2 groups for a certain period of time, and then see how that intervention over 12 weeks, 6 months affects outcomes. So in this study, it was a 12-week exercise program plus beetroot juice compared to an exercise program by itself. So we know that exercise is a you know, recommended as a treatment for peripheral artery disease, and it can improve patients' outcomes. But what's interesting is this study showed that when you combine the beetroot plus exercise, it improved their walking distance much more dramatically than just the exercise alone. So in fact, in this study, they actually measured walking distance on a treadmill test. So there's 2-minute stages on the treadmill test. So you start at a certain incline, and then every 2 minutes, the incline increases. But what's really fascinating is that the beetroot plus exercise actually improved the time that before the patients started feeling pain in their legs by over 2 minutes, which is a full stage of the treadmill test. And this was actually 200% greater increase than exercise alone. So we know exercise is good for treating PAD patients. And this study suggests that now if you add exercise plus beetroot, it can even lead to even further improvements. The next class of compounds that I'm going to talk about is organosulfur compounds. So these are compounds that contain sulfur. Again, one of the most widely one of the highest concentrations of these organosulfur compounds is actually garlic. So a lot of the health benefits of garlic seems to be due to the fact that garlic contains this compound called allicin. So allicin is actually the active flavor when garlic gets chopped or crushed. Now, allicin is a precursor to these 2 compounds called DATs and DADs, diallyl disulfide and diallyl trisulfide. Now, both DADS and DATS can actually give off something called hydrogen sulfide, so H2S. And H2S has been recently studied and shown to have a lot of antioxidant effects. So H2S can activate NRF2, that pathway that we talked about earlier, the master antioxidant pathway. And H2S can also increase nitric oxide levels. Interestingly, actually a pretty early study in 1993 tested if garlic could improve outcomes in PAD patients. Again, they did garlic plus training. This was a physical therapy program versus a physical therapy program plus placebo. And similarly to what we saw with the beetroot, when you combine the exercise program plus garlic, it led to even more dramatic increases in walking distance than exercise alone. Now, Stephen at the beginning mentioned that I grow my own broccoli sprouts, and that the reason for that is this next molecule that I'm going to talk about, which is probably my favorite phytochemical. So this is a compound called sulforaphane. So sulforaphane is actually the most potent NRF2 activator. So it is pretty much the gold standard of activating this antioxidant pathway of NRF2 or NRF2. And so sulforaphane is found in cruciferous vegetables. It is found in broccoli, but it's actually 1,000 times higher in the sprouts, broccoli sprouts, than the mature broccoli. Although broccoli does have still does have high levels of sulforaphane, as well as other cruciferous vegetables. But again, broccoli sprouts are the #1 source of sulforaphane. Now, sulforaphane has been studied in so many different diseases. It's been shown, again, this is just a list of some of the things that sulforaphane has been shown to do: reduce LDL, which is the bad cholesterol, reduce oxidative stress markers, improve insulin resistance, and improve fasting glucose. It's also, I mean, I'm only talking about more of the cardiovascular implications, but it's also been studied in so many different conditions like cancer, and it seems like it may have some beneficial effects, especially in prostate cancer. It's also been studied in many brain disorders, even like autism and schizophrenia and things like that. This paper, to me, published in Science Translational Medicine, is one of the strongest research studies that's been done with sulforaphane in the past few years, because the effects were, this was a large clinical trial where, again, they randomized patients to either sulforaphane from broccoli or a placebo, and what they found was that the patients that ate the sulforaphane had significantly reduced glucose production, fasting glucose, and so it really significantly improved, basically diabetes, type 2 diabetes markers. So it's very promising in that sense as well. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about briefly is just so I'm telling you all these great things about phytochemicals, and it sounds like why don't we just put these things in pills and just everybody take all the phytochemicals supplements that they can take. But the problem is that a lot of these phytochemicals do have bioavailability issues. There's certain chemistry rules that determine if a molecule is going to be absorbed well or not absorbed well. And unfortunately, a lot of these phytochemicals actually do not pass the test for being a good for being a good candidate for absorption. So, for example, some of the phytochemicals that seem promising from preclinical studies and like cell culture or animals, but it doesn't necessarily translate to humans, is, for example, curcumin, which is something that you all may have heard of. It still is a popular supplement. A lot of people take curcumin, but unfortunately, most of the evidence suggests that curcumin has a very low bioactivity and a very low clinical effectiveness. So it's led people to call curcumin, as you can see in these papers, a false cure, a cautionary tale. More than 120 clinical trials have been done, and then no double-blind placebo-controlled trial has actually shown curcumin to be successful. Same with resveratrol. Resveratrol was very popular, maybe 10 years ago or so. This is a compound found in red wine and grapes, and this was like the craze where people were saying, oh, red wine can improve your lifespan. Early studies suggested that resveratrol can improve lifespan. These studies were done in different species like C. elegans and mice as well. But unfortunately, there's been little evidence of much benefit in humans, and a lot of that has to go back to the bioavailability. So back to sulforaphane. One of the reasons that sulforaphane seems to be very successful in many of the clinical trials is that it has a very, very high bioavailability compared to most other phytochemicals that, for example, curcumin and resveratrol. They're much less bioavailable than sulforaphane, which is potentially could be one of the reasons that that we see, we don't see as strong effects in the human studies with some of the other phytochemicals. The CD value is basically the amount of the concentration of the molecule that will double the antioxidant enzymes. And as you can see, very, very little sulforaphane is needed, but resveratrol, you need way, way more. So again, that's one of the reasons that, some phytochemicals might not be, very effective, even though it might seem promising in like cell culture studies or animal studies. But basically, I wanted to segue that to talk about, instead of assigning, this phytochemical or that phytochemical, what we do know is that when individuals follow diets that include a wide variety of fruits and vegetables, it consistently is associated with better outcomes. So for example, this was one study where they randomized patients to either Mediterranean diet plus olive oil, Mediterranean diet plus nuts, or a low-fat diet. And actually both Mediterranean diets were actually associated with a reduced risk of PAD at 5-year follow-up, even though the control diet was a low-fat diet. So that's really important to think about. It wasn't just like a control Western diet. I know I'm running a little bit low on time, but I do want to talk briefly about, because I want to leave some time for questions. But I do want to talk briefly now a little bit about antioxidants and resistance training. I know some of y'all might be interested in this if you're athletes or hobby exercisers or lifters. But so back to what I was talking about earlier with the vitamins, vitamin C and vitamin E. We've established that, these supplementing with these vitamins does not necessarily lead to improved health outcomes in many and most of the clinical studies that have been done. What's actually interesting is that these vitamins have also been studied for performance. So a lot of studies have been done to see, if you supplement with vitamin C or vitamin E, high doses, the key here is high doses, can it improve, your performance or your muscle strength or your muscle hypertrophy? And what's really interesting is that in young individuals, what we see is vitamin C and vitamin E in very, very high doses. Again, I think you guys haven't gone over the RDAs yet. But when you go over the RDAs, you'll see how high 325 milligrams per day of vitamin E and 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C is. But supplementing with these was shown to actually reduce muscle strength compared to placebo. So there's this hypothesis, there's this idea that these vitamins might actually be, in a young, healthy individual who doesn't have a lot of reactive oxygen species, these high doses of vitamin C may be getting rid of all of those reactive oxygen species, which we do, like I mentioned earlier, we do need a little bit of reactive oxygen species. It's just only when they become overwhelming does it become an issue. But the problem is these ROS actually act as signaling molecules themselves, and they can activate pathways like growth pathways. And so when we're completely blunting the ROS, that can actually inhibit some of the progress that we get in the gym. Now, what's interesting is that we don't see that with phytochemicals, because remember, phytochemicals aren't scavengers. Instead, they just increase our own endogenous production of antioxidant enzymes, but they don't scavenge those ROS, which could be important signaling molecules. So there's been a lot of studies that have actually shown that, for example, tea extracts or tart cherry, which have high levels of antioxidants like quercetin and anthocyanins, they actually do not affect strength adaptations or hypertrophy adaptations. So unlike the vitamins that we in the previous slide, and actually instead there is evidence that they might speed up strength recovery or reduce muscle soreness and reduce muscle damage. And like we talked about earlier, there's also evidence that beetroot might improve performance and cardiorespiratory endurance. But the caveat here is that this is for young, healthy individuals, because older individuals who might actually have high levels of oxidative stress, there is some evidence that high doses of vitamin C and E can actually improve their increases in body composition, along with resistance training. So, you know, the key take point here is that if you're young and healthy, you probably don't have a lot of ROS, so it might not be necessary to supplement, or it would most likely not be recommended to supplement with these high doses of vitamin C and vitamin E. Now, if you're older and elderly individuals just do have higher levels of ROS, then maybe these vitamins can be helpful. But either way, phytochemicals, we know, do not seem to inhibit any of the strength or hypertrophy adaptations with training. So that might be the better route to take, is consuming, you know, high amounts of these phytochemicals, which again, instead of you know, scavenging ROS, they're just going to make your body more effective at fighting ROS on its own by increasing the antioxidant enzymes. So take home points: incorporate a variety of fruits and vegetables. So something that I don't know if I mentioned, but I meant to, is most of these phytochemicals dictate the color of the fruits and vegetables. So, for example, resveratrol in red wine and grapes is more of this purple color. Sulforaphane, you'll find it in these green cruciferous vegetables. For example, carotenes like beta carotene, you'll find in these orange fruits and vegetables. So the idea is, by eating a wide variety of fruits and vegetables, by incorporating a lot of different colors, you know, on your plate, you'll be sure to incorporate a lot of different phytochemicals into your diet, which may have many health benefits. Now, the other part of this is avoid marketing schemes. So I talked about epicatechin a little bit. And, you know, I said that there's evidence that, you know, dark chocolate might reduce oxidative stress, might help cardiovascular disease. But if you go to your local supplement store, you'll see epicatechin sold as this, you know, epi muscle, you know, huge epitech, increased muscle size. Now that's probably a little bit of a stretch, right? So there, you know, there might be some benefits, but it's always best to get these things from foods, and again, avoid marketing schemes. Not to mention that we don't actually know what's in there, because the supplement industry is not very well regulated, which I'm sure you'll hear about in the rest of your class and other classes. But definitely use a food first approach. Get enough vitamins and minerals, you know, but don't necessarily need high dose antioxidant supplements, especially if you're young and healthy, and especially if you're training, not too close to the training. But that being said, make sure you do get enough vitamins and minerals, because you know, there is evidence, and this is a study that we did a few years ago. There is evidence that especially athletes tend to consume much less than the recommended amounts of these micronutrients in their diet. And then lastly, if you ever hear a fad diet claiming that fruits and vegetables are bad, like I know recently the carnivore diet has been popular. Have any of y'all heard of the carnivore diet? It's basically a diet where you eat just meat, nothing else, no fruits and vegetables. I don't know if any of y'all have seen this guy, but he's been becoming, you know, viral, really popular recently. He goes by Liver King. But he, you know, he's big on like, oh, you know, only eat meat, only eat animal foods. And he actually eats them raw, which is really gross and a whole, you know, other issues on its own. But, you know, anytime you hear these fad diets about claims that fruits and vegetables are bad, you know, it's definitely a fad diet, because as I've, you know, shared with you guys, hopefully there is so much evidence that fruits and vegetables are associated with better health outcomes, less mortality, less cardiovascular disease, and that the individual phytochemicals themselves, there is some promising evidence that many of them may improve, disease outcomes by improving our endogenous antioxidant system. So I'll go ahead and take any questions that you all may have. I know I was planning to stop a little bit earlier to get a little bit more time for questions, but I think we're still good for a few questions.
Well, first and foremost, let's give Dr. Ismaeel a round of applause.
Thank you.
Awesome. So yeah, let's take 4 or 5 questions. How's that sound? Yes, come if you don't mind. Actually, can you come up, Andrea? I'm pretty sure you won't be able to hear her unless she's closer to the mic. So.
Yeah, I don't think so.
My question was basically like, what determines the bioavailability of like a phytochemical? Like, what makes, I think it was sulforaphane, like more bioavailable than the other?
So that's a very excellent question. And the only reason I skipped over that is because I was like, oh, I'm rushing. I need to finish. I want to get into the exercise stuff. But that's an excellent question. And I actually had a slide, but I just kind of skipped over it. But there's this chemistry rule called the Lipinski's rule of 5 that determines if something is going to have a high or low bioavailability. So if you have for something to be highly bioavailable, it should have less than 5 hydrogen bond donors, less than 10 hydrogen bond acceptors, a molecular weight less than 500, and a lipophilicity greater than 5. This is just like a measure. A log P is just the measure of lipophilicity. So lipophilicity means like how easy it is for crossing, the fatty, the fat in the membrane. Now, there's other factors that can affect bioavailability, including like how the compound is digested, how it's metabolized, how it's absorbed. But typically, it's going to be determined by the structure of the compound. So it's typically the structure of the compound that determines its bioavailability. So, for example, if you look here at curcumin, it's a very big molecule. It has a higher molecular weight. And so those are some of the factors that can affect its bioavailability, which is why curcumin does not seem to be very bioavailable. Same with lycopene, actually. It does not have a very high bioavailability. Sulforaphane is a pretty small molecule. And just based on the structure of the sulfurs, binding to specific target proteins, that's what allows that's what influences the bioavailability. So the general answer for that would be the structure of the structure of the phytochemical will determine the bioavailability. But that was a really good question.
All right, who else? At least 2 more people. I told them to write questions, so that
okay.
Way they had to think a little bit. Yeah,
Um,
I'm sure they have good questions. Sometimes people are just like hesitant to ask them, right?
absolutely.
So, how does oxidative stress damage the cells?
Okay, that's also a really good question. So how does oxidative stress damage the cell? Let me see if am I sharing this, or 1 second. Yeah, so basically the reactive oxygen species are very highly reactive, and so they can react with lipids in the cell. So our cell membrane is made of mostly lipids. So the reactive oxygen species can actually bind to the lipids, and then when they bind to the lipids, they damage the lipids. They can bind to proteins and damage the proteins. They can bind to DNA and damage the DNA. So it's the high reactivity of the molecules that causes them to have a very high chance that they're going to bind to something that they shouldn't bind to. And when they bind to that, for example, like let's say you have a protein and you have a reactive oxygen species bind to that protein, it may signal the protein to be degraded because it's now no longer the protein, it's now an oxidized form of the protein because it has something bound to it that shouldn't be there. So it's just the high reactivity that causes the damage.
Awesome. One more question, at least, unless y'all decide that you all of a sudden have a bunch of new questions, which sometimes does happen. One more. I have an aside question for you really quick, actually.
Yeah.
So first of all, really good job. I really liked I liked the comprehensive nature of everything that you did. You covered a lot of compounds that I was, only familiar with by name. So it was really nice. I noticed the tamoxifen was actually on. Was that like a control in that scenario?
Yeah, it was just like a comparative. It's like
Okay.
so the paper was like a comparative bio. I knew you'd notice that. That was one of the first thing I noticed too. It was like a comparative bioavailability of like drugs and phytochemicals. So
Awesome. Yeah, I was
yeah.
like, okay, I didn't know that tamoxifen was derived from a phytochemical, but but yeah,
Yeah.
that's the case. And then as a side question to allow them time to come up with one more question, when you're talking about the poor bioavailability of something like curcumin, is that taking into account the addition of something like piperin, which would be able to enhance the bioavailability?
Yeah, so actually when the last question was gonna asked, I was gonna say that one of the one of the areas of research right now is finding ways to improve the bioavailability of these compounds. So for example, there's a lot of studies now where they conjugate, some of these phytochemicals to something else to allow it to be more bioavailable, or deliver them in like nanoparticles or like novel delivery systems.
Right.
So though that is just talking about the phytochemical on its own, but there have been advancements in like the delivery systems and such to enhance the bioavailability of the compounds for sure.
Awesome. Perfect. All right, one more question. No.
Someone should have one more.
All right. Question number 2. Go for it. Would you mind coming up? I'm sorry. I know. Maybe that's why no one wants to do it, because no one wants to actually like come up to the front of the class.
So the vitamin C has antioxidant properties, right?
Sorry, say that one more time.
The vitamin C has antioxidant property, right?
Yes.
So is that related to the benefits vitamin C has on the immune system?
Yeah. So yeah, vitamin C, ascorbic acid. It's what's considered one of the scavenger antioxidants. So it can actually donate an electron to a superoxide or a free radical, and quench the free radical. So definitely vitamin C definitely has it plays many more roles than just being an antioxidant. If you don't have if you're not getting enough vitamin C, there's a lot of other health issues that can arise, like scurvy is the most commonly known associated with vitamin C deficiency. But so you definitely need to consume you definitely need to consume enough vitamin C, but the issue that I was talking about, and I think it's so like the recommended allowance for vitamins, or the recommended the RDA for vitamin C should be around 100 milligrams, maybe, right, Stephen? Like,
I think that's true. I always make it relative to like what is an emergency, which is like 1,000 times more than you need. But
yeah, so you definitely need to get at least the RDA, but at least the evidence doesn't suggest that if you take much higher levels that it would have like a very impactful effect on like cardiovascular disease or other diseases. Again, like I said, just because you don't know if it's actually going to get to the target tissue that you want it to get to. You don't know if the vitamin C itself might get oxidized. So there are some issues with overdoing it with the vitamins. Not any, because it's a water soluble, it's not as worrisome. You don't have like toxicity issues, but I would say it's just does not seem to be necessary to, supplement with high levels of vitamin C, as long as you're getting, in your diet enough, through the intake of, and the fruits and vegetables have vitamin C as well, right? So not only are you getting phytochemicals, fruits and vegetables, but you're also getting the vitamins and minerals that you need as well. So, but it seems that phytochemicals might be more promising. Like I said, pretty much all of the studies, the large clinical trials that have tested, vitamin C or vitamin E for improving outcomes or preventing cardiovascular disease have not been very successful. So it seems like the more, better approach, it could potentially be increasing your own enzymatic antioxidant response rather than just like, taking a bunch of antioxidants that you don't know, where they're actually going or if they're really doing much. Does that make sense?
Awesome. Cool. Thank you for asking questions. It's great. All right, I think we'll probably end that there. You've been very gracious with your time, and we definitely appreciate you coming to talk to us. So,
of course, yeah, I enjoyed it too. Hopefully, like I always try to end with these take-home points because I know you're not going to remember, NRF2 or epic catechin or but I try to end with those take-home points because those are things that I really think can make a difference in your life. 20 years from now, because fad diets are popping up every day. The carnivore diet, this diet. So as long as I think you remember those take-home points, eat fruits and vegetables. Don't buy into marketing schemes. Try to get all of your vitamins and minerals from foods first, for sure. I think that's pretty much, that was my goal of the talk, is to hopefully get you guys thinking about the benefits of fruits and vegetables.
You'd make the American Dietetic Association very happy with those words.
Yeah. That's funny. And it's funny because I used to not be like that at all. My diet changed significantly after graduate school. I mean, I was the guy that ate rice and chicken. That's it, like rice and chicken. And then I went to grad school and started learning about, the, potential, amazing effects of the phytochemicals. And now my plate is like 90% vegetables. So
that's great. For everyone,
yeah.
I can't see what Dr. Ismaeel looks like. He's a huge jack bodybuilder. So. yeah.
And I'm like Liver King. I'm telling you to eat fruits and vegetables. So yeah, well,
God among men when it comes to bodybuilders. So there you go.
All right, thanks guys. Thanks, Stephen.
I'll make sure to get that video to you, and I'll also, if you're okay with it, I'll include your email in case they have any additional questions that they decided they were too shy to ask during your presentation.
Yeah, of course, no worries.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate.
All right, thanks guys. Have a good rest of your day.
Awesome. Bye.
Bye.